Alright, so a little recap. So the story of Ezra, and we have to understand that this is after the Babylonian exile. It's interesting to note that just like in the Exodus, right? They went into in Exodus they were slaves. So let's look at the law of second mention. This is the second time that's happened in the Bible. So from my understanding, the only other time that they were given articles of gold and silver, totally sponsored, give them whatever they ask for and leave was in the Exodus. So the law of second mention is always note that. Take a look. The law of second mention is a highlight. Important, double notice of notice. So when you're looking at Ezra, it's interesting to see that Ezra is actually a Bible scholar. All right. It says he's a scribe. So as disciples in Jesus Christ, he's exactly what we do. We read the Bible, you try to encourage and uplift and show people about God. That's exactly what Ezra was. Now, he was in favor with the king because basically when you live right before God, you have confidence, not just before God, but also men. So it's interesting that the hand of the Lord was on Ezra to where he was sponsored by even the king. So when looking out of getting out of slavery, getting out of bondage, getting out of, being in exile and walking into that freedom, notice how in Proverbs, Jesus says, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come so that we might have life, that they might have life and life more abundantly. The Aramaic reads, and to destroy the works of the enemy. So when we look at these things, it's interesting to note how we go from being enslaved, being in bondage, to being free. But in Proverbs, it does say that when the thief is caught, he must pay sevenfold, plus everything in his household. So we know that Babylon got totally wrecked, destroyed by the Persian Empire. So this is all in the Middle East. You have to remember that. So along the way that Ezra was sponsored by the king, west of the Euphrates, anything you want, you could have it. By the king, right? Notice how he says Lord of Lords. His own title. Xerxes' own title, Artaxerxes, Lord of Lords. So we do know that Darius is a Mede, right? But Darius is also in the book of Jeremiah, I believe by name, or maybe it's Daniel. But here's where it's interesting. He does get Chicky stop. He does get sponsored going over, and I think that the king is very delighted in Ezra. So we know that they're building the temple, right? They're trying to rebuild the temple. This is a ray of hope for every person who's been in rehab, because we are the temple. And sometimes we do mess up. And sometimes we do need to be rebuilt up. And it's interesting to note that we have God's full acceptance. We have his full acceptance and we have his favor. Notice how Ezra did keep a good heart before God. It does say he repented. It does say he fasted. It does say that he humbled himself. And it does say that he was trying to lead others to repent at the river of Ahava, which is love. It is interesting that he was doing these things before God and not necessarily before man. So let's notice the double instance that they left with all the gold and the silver. Everything that was stolen, they got back plus more. So if you do the math, it probably is a little more than 7 times over. Probably. So in the book of Jeremiah, it shows everything that was taken from the temple, everything that was sacked. So if you look at Ezra, after looking at the mathematics from Jeremiah, it might be right. But it's interesting to notice these concepts of, given favor. Oh, whatever they ask for, just give it to them. You're children of God, sponsored by the Lord of Lords, to go be a Bible nerd, As he said to Ezra, go be a Bible nerd. If someone doesn't know the law of God, teach them. But it's very interesting how just note with me. It's interesting how in Egypt, the Lord Yahweh made a fool of every god of Egypt. The whole world knew the God of Israel is the real God, and he brought the Israelites out of Egypt, along the way knocking all of them, right? And totally destroying their military. Their neighbors gave them gold and silver for the 400 years of payment, of being enslaved. So it's interesting that the same thing happens. The same thing happened going back from Babylon, going from the Medes and the Persians, that they were allowed to ask for these things and that the people were encouraged to give to them on their way out. So, I think that these are key notes when looking into it, because sometimes in life, you got to repent. You got to, refocus. Sometimes you need to rebuild your temple, and it does happen. Well, for 10 chapters, that's my notes on it. I hope it helps.